The reading clerk will now call the roll.
Adams. Jeffries. Adderholt. Johnson. Aguilar. Jeffries. Alford.
Servant Leader, Honorable Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Allen.
Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Allred. Jeffries. Amadei.
Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Armstrong. Johnson. Arrington. Johnson. Auchincloss. Jeffries. Babin. Johnson. Bacon. Johnson. Baird. Johnson. Balderson. Johnson. Ballant. Jeffries. Banks. Johnson. Barr. Johnson. Berrigan. Jeffries. Bean of Florida. Johnson. Beatty. Jeffries. Bentz. Johnson. Barra. Jeffries. Bergman. Johnson. Beyer. Beyer. Bice. Johnson. Biggs. Johnson. Bilirakis.
Absolutely, Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Bishop of Georgia. Jeffries. Bishop of North Carolina. Johnson. Blumenauer. Jeffries. Blunt Rochester. Jeffries. Boebert. Johnson. Bonamici. Jeffries. Bost. Johnson. Bowman. Jeffries. Boyle of Pennsylvania. Boyle of Pennsylvania. Burkeen. Johnson. Brown. Jeffries. Brownlee. Jeffries. Buchanan.
Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Buck. Johnson. Bouchon. Johnson. Bazinski. Jeffries. Burchett. Johnson. Burgess. Johnson. Burleson. Johnson. Bush. Jeffries. Calvert. Johnson. Kamek. Johnson. Caraveo. Jeffries. Carbajal. Jeffries. Cardenas. Jeffries. Carey. Johnson. Carl. Johnson. Carson. Jeffries. Carter of Georgia. Johnson. Carter of Louisiana. Jeffries. Carter of Texas. Johnson. Cartwright. Jeffries. Kassar. Jeffries. Case. Jeffries. Caston. Jeffries. Castor of Florida. Jeffries. Castro of Texas. Jeffries. Chavez de Reamer. Johnson. Sherfilis McCormick. Jeffries. Chu. Jeffries. Siscomani. Johnson. Clark of Massachusetts. Jeffries. Clark of New York. Jeffries. Cleaver. Jeffries. Klein. Johnson. Cloud. Johnson. Clyburn. Jeffries. Clyde. Johnson. Cohen. Jeffries. Cole. Johnson. Collins. Johnson. Comer. Johnson. Connolly. Jeffries. Correa. Correa. Costa. Jeffries. Courtney. Jeffries. Craig.
Happy wedding anniversary to my wife, Hakeem Jeffries.
Jeffries. Crane. Johnson. Crawford. Johnson. Crenshaw. Johnson. Crockett. Jeffries. Crow. Jeffries. Cuellar. Jeffries. Curtis. Johnson. Davis of Kansas. Jeffries. Davidson. Johnson. Davis of Illinois. Jeffries. Davis of North Carolina. Jeffries. Dean of Pennsylvania. Jeffries. DeGette. Jeffries. Dela Cruz. Johnson. DeLauro. Jeffries. Del Bene. Jeffries. DeLuzio. Jeffries. DeSaulnier. Jeffries. Desjardins. Johnson. Diaz-Pizito. Johnson. Diaz-Balart. Johnson. Dingle. Jeffries. Doggett. Jeffries. Donalds. Johnson. Duarte. Johnson. Duncan. Johnson. Dunn of Florida.
Johnson.
Johnson. Edwards.
Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Elsie. Johnson. Emmer. Johnson. Escobar. Jeffries. Eshu. Jeffries. Espaillat. Jeffries. Estes. Johnson. Evans. Jeffries. Ezell.
Big Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Fallon.
Fourth District of Texas proudly and enthusiastically vote for Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Finstra. Johnson. Ferguson. Johnson. Finstad. Johnson. Fishbach. Johnson. Fitzgerald. Johnson. Fitzpatrick. Johnson. Fleischman.
Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Fletcher. Jeffries. Flood. Johnson. Foster. Jeffries. Fushi. Jeffries. Fox. Johnson. Lois Frankel. Jeffries. Scott Franklin. Johnson. Frost. Jeffries. Fry. Johnson. Fulcher. Johnson. Gates. Johnson. Gallagher. Johnson. Gallego. Gallego. Garamendi. Jeffries. Garbarino. Johnson. Mike Garcia. Johnson. Robert Garcia. Jeffries. Garcia of Illinois. Jeffries. Garcia of Texas. Jeffries. Jimenez. Johnson. Golden of Maine. Jeffries. Goldman of New York. Jeffries. Gomez. Jeffries. Tony Gonzalez. Johnson. Vicente Gonzalez. Vicente Gonzalez. Good of Virginia. Johnson. Gooden of Texas. Johnson. Gosar. Johnson. Gottheimer. Jeffries. Granger. Johnson. Graves of Louisiana. Johnson. Graves of Missouri. Johnson. Green of Tennessee. Johnson. Green of Texas.
The Speaker in waiting, the Honorable Hakeem Jeffries.
Jeffries. Green of Georgia. Johnson. Griffith. Johnson. Grijalva. Jeffries. Grothman. Johnson. Guest. Johnson. Guthrie. Johnson. Hageman. Johnson. Harder of California. Jeffries. Harris. Johnson. Harshbarger. Johnson. Hayes. Jeffries. Hearn. Johnson. Higgins of Louisiana. Johnson. Higgins of New York. Jeffries. Hill. Johnson. Himes. Jeffries. Henson. Johnson. Horsford.
For democracy, Hakeem Jeffries.
Jeffries. Houchin. Johnson. Houlihan. Jeffries. Hoyer. Jeffries. Hoyle of Oregon. Jeffries. Hudson. Johnson. Huffman. Jeffries. Huizinga. Johnson. Hunt.
Mark Johnson.
Johnson. Issa. Johnson. Ivy. Jeffries. Jackson of Illinois.
The Honorable Hakeem Jeffries.
Jeffries. Jackson of North Carolina. Jeffries. Jackson of Texas. Johnson. Jackson Lee.
The distinguished gentleman, Hakeem Jeffries.
Jeffries. Jacobs. Jeffries. James. Johnson. Jayapal. Jeffries. 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 Johnson of Georgia.
Standing for reproductive freedom for women, I cast my vote for Hakeem Jeffries.
Jeffries. Johnson of Louisiana. Johnson. Johnson of Ohio. Johnson. Johnson of South Dakota. Johnson. Jordan. Johnson. Joyce of Ohio. Joyce of Ohio. Johnson. Joyce of Pennsylvania. Johnson. Camlogger Dove. Jeffries. Captor. Jeffries. Kane of New Jersey. Johnson. Keating. Jeffries. Kelly of Illinois. Jeffries. Kelly of Mississippi. Johnson. Kelly of Pennsylvania. Johnson. Khanna. Jeffries. Kiggins of Virginia. Johnson. Kildee. Jeffries. Kiley. Johnson. Kilmer. Jeffries. Kim of California. Johnson. Kim of New Jersey. Jeffries. Krishnamurthy. Jeffries. Custer. Jeffries. Kustoff. Johnson. LaHood. Johnson. LaLota. Johnson. LaMalfa. Johnson. Lamborn. Johnson. Landsman. Landsman. Jeffries. Langworthy. Johnson. Larson of Washington. Jeffries. Larson of Connecticut. Jeffries. Latta. Johnson. LaTurner. Johnson. Lawler. Johnson. Lee of California. Jeffries. Lee of Florida. Johnson. Lee of Nevada. Jeffries. Lee of Pennsylvania. Jeffries. Ledger Fernandez. Jeffries. Lesko. Johnson. Letlow. Johnson. Levin. Jeffries. Liu. Jeffries. Lofgren. Jeffries. Loudermilk.
Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Lucas. Johnson. Luke Kameyer. Johnson. Luna. Johnson. Luttrell. Johnson. Lynch. Jeffries. Mace. Johnson. Magaziner. Jeffries. Maliotakis. Johnson. Mann. Johnson. Manning. Jeffries. Massey. Johnson. Mast. Johnson. Matsui. Jeffries. McBath. Jeffries. McCarthy. Johnson. McCall. Johnson. McLean. Johnson. McClellan. Jeffries. McClintock. Johnson. McCullum. Jeffries. McCormick. Johnson. McGarvey. Jeffries. McGovern. Jeffries. McHenry. Johnson. Meeks. Jeffries. Menendez. Jeffries. Ming. Jeffries. Muser. Johnson. Mfume. Jeffries. Miller of Illinois. Johnson. Miller of Ohio. Johnson. Miller of West Virginia. Johnson. Miller Meeks. Johnson. Mills.
For the Republic, Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Molinaro.
Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Molinar. Johnson. Mooney. Johnson. Moore of Alabama. Johnson. Moore of Utah. Johnson. Moore of Wisconsin. Jeffries. Moran. Johnson. Morelli. Jeffries. Moskowitz. Jeffries. Moulton. Jeffries. Mervan. Jeffries. Mullen. Jeffries. Murphy. Johnson. Nadler. Jeffries. Napolitano. Jeffries. Neal. Jeffries. Neguse. Jeffries. Nels. Johnson. Newhouse. Johnson. Nickel. Jeffries. Norcross. Jeffries. Norman. Johnson. Nunn of Iowa.
Miracle Mike
Johnson. Obernolte. Johnson. Ocasio-Cortez. Jeffries. Ogles. Johnson. Omar. Jeffries. Owens. Johnson. Pallone. Jeffries. Palmer. Johnson. Panetta. Jeffries. Pappas. Jeffries. Pasquale. Jeffries. Payne.
Gentleman from New York, Hakeem Jeffries.
Jeffries. Pelosi.
As one who knows and respects the role of Speaker, Hakeem Jeffries.
Jeffries. Peltola. Jeffries. Pence. Johnson. Perez. Jeffries. Perry. Johnson. Peters, Jeffries. Pedersen, Jeffries. Pfluger, Johnson. Phillips, Jeffries. Pingree, Jeffries. Pocan, Jeffries. Porter, Jeffries. Posey, Johnson. Presley, Jeffries. Quigley, Jeffries. Ramirez,
Hakeem Jeffries.
Jeffries. Raskin, Jeffries. Reschenthaler, Johnson. Rogers of Washington, Johnson. Rogers of Alabama, Johnson. Rogers of Kentucky, Johnson. Rose, Johnson. Rosendale, Johnson. Ross, Jeffries. Rouser, Johnson. Roy, Johnson. Ruiz, Jeffries. Rupersberger, Jeffries. Rutherford,
The very honorable Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Ryan, Jeffries. Salazar, Johnson. Salinas, Jeffries. Sanchez, Jeffries. Santos, Johnson. Sarbanes, Jeffries. Scalise,
Great state of Louisiana, Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Scanlon, Jeffries. Schakowsky, Jeffries. Schiff, Jeffries. Snyder, Jeffries. Skolton, Jeffries. Schreier, Jeffries. Swikert, Johnson. Austin Scott, Johnson. David Scott, Jeffries. Scott of Virginia, Jeffries. Self, Johnson. Sessions, Johnson. Sewell, Jeffries. Sherman, Jeffries. Sherrill, Jeffries. Simpson, Johnson. Slotkin, Jeffries. Smith of Missouri, Johnson. Smith of Nebraska, Johnson. Smith of New Jersey, Johnson. Smith of Washington, Jeffries. Smucker, Johnson. Sorensen, Jeffries. Soto, Jeffries. Spamberger, Jeffries. Sparts. Johnson. Stansbury. Jeffries. Stanton. Jeffries. Stauber. Johnson. Steele. Johnson. Stefanik. Johnson. Style. Johnson. Stube. Johnson. Stevens. Jeffries. Strickland.
For the protection of voting rights, Hakeem Jeffries.
Jeffries. Strong. Johnson. Swalwell. Jeffries. Sykes. Jeffries. Takano. Jeffries. Tenney.
The Honorable Mike Johnson of Louisiana.
Johnson. Tanadar. Jeffries. Thompson of California. Jeffries. Thompson of Mississippi. Jeffries. Thompson of Pennsylvania. Johnson. Tiffany. Johnson. Timmons. Johnson. Titus. Jeffries. Tlaib. Jeffries. Takuda. Jeffries. Tonko. Jeffries. Torres of California. Jeffries. Torres of New York. Jeffries. Trahan. Jeffries. Trone. Jeffries. Turner. Johnson. Underwood. Jeffries. Valadeo. Johnson. Van Drew.
We are back better than ever. Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Van Dyne. Johnson. Van Orden. Van Orden. Vargas. Jeffries. Vasquez. Jeffries. Vesey. Jeffries. Velasquez. Jeffries. Wagner. Johnson. Wahlberg. Johnson. Waltz. Johnson. Wasserman Schultz. Jeffries. Waters.
He supports freedom of choice, Hakeem Jeffries.
Jeffries. Watson Coleman.
As the only candidate who represents the integrity of this House,
Watson Coleman.
again, do I need to say Hakeem Jeffries again because I read?
Jeffries.
The House will come to order. The clerk, the staff, and the tellers deserve to have the attention of the House. The clerk will continue.
Weber of Texas. Johnson. Webster of Florida. Johnson. Winstrup. Johnson. Westerman. Johnson. Wexton. Jeffries. Wild. Jeffries. Williams of Georgia.
Fulton County, Georgia, votes for Hakeem Jeffries.
Jeffries. Williams of New York. Johnson. Williams of Texas. Johnson. Wilson of Florida. Wilson of Florida. Jeffries. Wilson of South Carolina. Johnson. Whitman. Johnson. Womack.
With the 217th pick in the race for Speaker in the 3rd District of Arkansas, selects Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Yacom. Johnson. Zinke.
The next Speaker of the People's House, Mike Johnson.
Johnson.
The clerk will now call the names of the members who did not answer the first call of the roll.
Byer. Jeffries. Who do you have? Oh. Boyle of Pennsylvania. Boyle of Pennsylvania. Correa. Correa. Gallego. Jeffries. Vicente Gonzalez. Vicente Gonzalez. Van Orden. Van Orden.
If there are any members who did not answer the call of the roll, they may come to the well and vote at this time. tellers agree in their tallies that the total number of votes cast is 429, of which the Honorable Mike Johnson of the state of Louisiana has received 220 votes. And the Honorable Hakeem Jeffries of the state of New York has received 209 votes. Therefore, the Honorable Mike Johnson of the state of Louisiana, having received a majority of the votes cast, is duly elected Speaker of the House of Representatives for the 118th Congress.